Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Focused on Infinity podcast. Today we're doing something a little new and different, and we have a guest with us. Someone who has not been on before, but is a long-time friend and excellent human, named Paul Hoppe. He is a master Tae Kwon Do person and a master poker person as well. He is skilled in many means of contending and also a master guitarist, even though I'm not sure there is a classification for such, but if there were one, he would be given it. So, hello, Paul. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Logan, and everybody out in the listening and viewing world. Thanks for having me on the show.
You're quite welcome. So let's just start with, tell us a little bit about the things that what are you doing most right now?
Staying at home. A lot of that.
That's a good bet right now.
While staying at home, I play a lot of poker on various, at-home platforms, and doing a little bit of podcasting here and there, and doing a little bit of Twitchcraft streaming, like mostly chess, some poker, some language learning type stuff, and overall just kind of, hunkering down while the world is, how it is.
Properly aflame, yes.
Yes.
And tell us about your experience and or exploits with martial arts, in brief, of course, since that's a much longer topic.
Right. The brief story. I guess, I started as a kid, and then I stopped for a little while. Then I started as a teenager, then I stopped for a little while. Then when I was 20, I really started doing a lot of Tae Kwon Do at a school in Times Square. And then a few years later, my teacher went and opened a school on the Upper West Side. Sorry, I don't know why I said East. And then I took over the school in Times Square and ran it for a couple years, where Logan was a student. And, we had some good times, some not as good times. And
no one actually went out the window, so I think we came out of it okay.
No one went all the way through the window. I may have kicked someone through the window and pulled them back in.
Right, he did.
Yeah.
Right.
It was.
He did go out the window.
They were eventful days. Yeah, I mean, things could have gone worse, right? And
that's fair.
And then I stopped for a little while again and kind of traveled the world for a little while to play online poker, and then came back and taught some more. And then about, maybe 5 to 6 years ago, I moved to New Jersey and just stopped practicing as much, and rapidly gained weight and lost flexibility. But still do a little kicking and punching here and there, but not nearly as much.
I understand that struggle very well. Yes, the flexibility thing. No one tells you. You gotta just keep doing it, or your muscles will just lock up. And once you hit 40, they're gonna lock up anyway. So you have to do like twice as much to get half as far.
Yeah, and it's hard having. Tae Kwon Do is not the only thing that I did a lot of. I practiced 6 hours a day or 6. Yeah, I meant to say 6 days a week, but then I was like, well, it was really more like 7 days a week a lot of the times. And I was teaching or practicing just all day long for years.
Yeah.
And then went to not doing it much. But then every time I would come back to it, there's this this is how good I was. These are the things I'm capable of. Let me try. Oh, no, not that yet.
That's not happening anymore.
Right? I think that's true with any skill, that it's hard to come back to. But then once you do, you've got to kind of take it a little easy and then kind of build back up.
Right. Okay.
Somewhat gradually.
And tell us about you've talked about martial arts, talked about poker. Talk to us a little bit about music.
Yeah, so I started playing guitar as a teenager, and kind of put the same sort of passion for improvement, for developing a skill into it. And when I'd been playing for maybe 6 months, I just like took one 13-second bit and like practiced it 8 hours a day for 2 weeks until my fingers bled, and then I was a much better guitar player. But it's also
Huh.
something I came to and left, and came to and left. And you and I were in how many bands? There was Shelf Life briefly together,
Right.
and then again individually, and then Viscera, and then I think I played with a friend on the West Coast for a while, and then came back to the East Coast, and we had Voice of a Secret, and then I kind of started doing more martial arts, and then we did Villain's Lament, and I think that was about the last serious musical endeavor that I've engaged in.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Okay, and tell us about the style of music you like to play best.
I like thrash. Like I like to play fast and loud, but also, I mean, something about like thrash metal that always really appealed to me was, the changes. Was you've got some irregular time signatures, but also just you've got large dynamic changes. And so, the stuff that we were always working on, I liked to try to have, some quiet parts and some loud parts, some slow parts, some fast parts,
Yeah.
and really melody, like a strong melodic component, and like, a minor sixth, just like always a minor sixth,
Oh,
right?
well, you got to have those. I mean, otherwise it's not music.
Exactly.
So let's talk about shifting gears entirely away from the personal. Now, guess who's on the Supreme Court?
Yeah. What's the Supreme Court? And yeah, I have thoughts. It it feels kind of surreal that it's just like, oh, well, that just happened. Like, how is that just that easy? Like,
Yeah.
what, Obama appoints Merrick Garland, and it's like, no, we're just gonna come up with this reason that like is bullshit, right? About like, well, the next president, the election should determine who gets to decide who's on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And then 4 years later, after we fill that seat and another seat, now we're just going to be like, yeah, we're just going to push this through. It just there's a point to which I feel like the Republican Party's principal goal is to undermine the um, what's the word? Like the legitimacy of the
Of
U.S. federal
government
government,
itself. Yes. I
right?
mean,
Of government itself.
I'm
Yes.
100%.
And
I mean,
especially,
that seems to be their, I mean, it's almost their stated goal, right? Because,
yeah, no, it is. It is. Right.
and they have been extremely, extremely effective at doing so. I mean, that's like what they do, and that's why I always say that Trump is not a departure from the Republican Party.
Yeah.
He is, I mean, it's like he's its apex, and he's it laid completely bare, right? And I mean,
Yeah.
now him personally, right? A lot of people are like, well, Trump and Biden are the same, blah blah blah, and I'm like, no. They are both dangerous because all presidents are hideously dangerous because the
Yeah.
American instrument is an instrument of death and torture, right? But Biden is dangerous just because he would be a president, right? And because he has,
Hmm.
and because he's American. Americans, by and large, have regressive views about important things. We are all learning. One of the other good things, I mean, if there can be said to be any good things about Trump, is that he has laid bare that, like, when people say America, right? When he says make America great again or keep America great or any shit like that, like he's talking about an America that we don't want.
Yeah.
But the one that we want is one that never actually existed. And
Yeah.
that's like, that's something that we just got to get over it. We got to get out of our heads that, like, the idea of America is like the shining city on the hill and whatever, like that was all a lie. That was a lie. That was the propaganda that they gave us to keep us from seeing that, we are by far the most rapacious empire the world has ever seen, like by far. But the difference between Trump and Biden, before I go too far afield, is that Trump is personally unhinged in a way that Biden is not. So, we can't have somebody like that in a second term with nothing left to lose, who is also, he's actively a fascist. I've said this before on the show, but the machinery of America is inherently fascist. So there's always going to be fascist shit going on, but it's not always in the hands of a fascist. And like Barack Obama, Joe Biden, these people are not personally fascist. They are neoliberals through and through, right? Which means they kind of believe in, the mythology of American excellence and all that shit, right? They're not, and they want to keep norms intact. They want to keep all the norms intact, right? But, the forms of America are such that they're just going to do damage just by existing, just by doing regular president shit, right? So anyway, I went off on a tangent there, but yeah, please continue.
Well, you saved me the trouble.
Yeah.
I would definitely co-sign the vast majority of everything you just said. I think the idea of the U.S. president, I remember when Trump first got elected and people were like, oh, well, you have to respect the office or blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no.
Yeah, no, the fuck I don't.
Abolish the office. Donald Trump would be horrible if he weren't the U.S. president, but not horrible in a deeply consequential way, right?
Yes.
100%. He took out ads about the Central Park
Exonerated 5, yes.
5, exactly, and those were horrible things for him to say and things for him to do, but the consequence of that was I don't want to say nothing, but it wasn't. He wasn't able to be like, oh yeah, we're just going to kill him. He was able to say, I think we should do that, which is ridiculous, which is absurd and evil, right? But he didn't have the power to make it so. Whereas when you're the president of the United States, you could just be like, yeah, we're gonna kill a bunch of people over there, and then they're dead. Yeah. And no one should have that much power, I think. And
agreed heartily.
I think it really needs to be diffused amongst more people and more nations, and there shouldn't be a power there shouldn't be a power like the United States if it is not controlled by everyone, and that power should never be in the hands of just obviously not all the power is in the hands of one person, but a really, really grossly large amount is. And, when that's someone like, say, Joe Biden, who I think really thinks he's doing good stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's going to deliberately try to use the office of the presidency to greatly enrich himself. I think he will to some extent, because I think most presidents kind of do to some extent. And, there's definitely
we have legalized
corruption.
Bribery. So it's we
exactly.
can't even call it corruption in the way we used to, because, campaign, they just renamed it campaign contributions. It's not called bribery anymore, but that's what it is.
Right. Exactly. The system itself is corrupt, right? So it doesn't really matter so much. There's a tiny number of politicians who are going to say, no, I'm going to forgo that. And they're going to sometimes be successful, but it's obviously, it creates an unlevel playing field. And, I think a Joe Biden presidency will, America will keep doing awful things throughout the world, and horrible things will keep happening here. It's not like the local police aren't going to go around murdering people. That's not going to stop happening. But, there probably aren't going to be, unmarked federal troops going in places and snatching people off the street. That's probably not going to happen. And there's going to be a better chance to actually make progress on a huge range of issues that right now there's no trying to make progress on those issues. There's trying to fight against it sliding further in the wrong direction.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I am not terribly okay. I feel that the moment we're in is like the revelation that, okay, everyone always shits on me when I say that, like, voting is like the absolute bare bones that you can do, right? And one of the things that irritates me about the whole conversation around voting is that, especially, and I mean, it's people who don't realize how much like fucking privilege they have, that they can just show up to politics when it comes time to vote. Meanwhile, other people are in the trenches all the time. And, then the entire thing gets inundated by these fucking scream shouty neolibs who are like, vote or you don't care, or like you're leaving everybody under the bus. And it's like, where the fuck have you been? Black Lives Matter has been happening for a while now, and like I didn't see you. Okay. I haven't seen you. I haven't seen you posting about it. I haven't seen you talking about it. I haven't seen you at meetings. You haven't joined the DSA, or, there's all these things that you could have been doing in between voting that would have helped us build the power to prevent a lot of this stuff from happening, right? Because like one of the lessons of Bolivia is that, and people are like, oh yeah, they voted for socialism. It's like, okay, they voted for socialism. That's absolutely true. They voted overwhelmingly for it. But the only reason they were able to even get to the point of voting is because the people got in the streets and shut the fucking country down. There was a general strike that was performed that forced the government to have another election. Okay, so it's like, yes, the vote is, I mean, voting, it's like, it's weirdly vital and it's also like weirdly inconsequential, but it's like, and now my theory is you just have to do all of it. You have to do everything, right? And so like people who are like, oh, don't vote because it's all bullshit. I'm like, okay, well, that's not exactly true, because we have joined a game already in progress. And one of the rules of the game is that voting is the mechanism by which we do things. So no matter how bullshit it is, you kind of still have to do it. Otherwise, you're just ceding ground, right? And also, like, local elections, majorly important, right? Local elections can be decided by, like, a couple hundred votes. I think Bernie Sanders famously said he won.
Oh, his first campaign for mayor, right?
Yeah, his first campaign for mayor by like a couple votes, like by a really, really slender margin. So local elections will always, and also just, on the concept of people's governance. What was that? We seem to be experiencing technical difficulties. All right, well, we're going to take a little pause and we'll get right back.
Technical difficulties.
Whatever. It's fine. I mean, it's also Mercury retrograde. There's a, whatever. It is what it is. It is what it is. Okay, so getting back to Amy Coney Barrett and the Supreme Court and what it means for what's going to happen. So what do you think are going to be the underpinnings of what it, and what do you think actually, I mean, the underpinnings of what this is going to mean are pretty obvious, and that they're very, very bad. But what do you think we should do in response is a better question.
I think that's a really good question, and I would really like to have better answers than I do. So just to kind of go back, like, I think, like, I don't believe in the legitimacy of government in like a philosophical sense, right? Like I consider myself an anarchist, by which I mean not like, oh, let's overthrow any government by violent means. That's not what I mean. What I mean is I don't think that there is any inherent legitimacy of any type of authority, right? I think authority should always be questioned, and then we should always listen to the answers also. And so when it comes to government, I think, first of all, there is one, or there are many, right? And we should acknowledge that that's a structure that's already been built by humans, by societies, but generally by particular people within those societies, and then has been influenced by a broader number of people. And so I don't see some sort of like magical, like, I don't have some sort of faith in government, or think that it like has to exist in any of the forms that it does. I do, however, look at it and say, okay, there's an extent to which this government represents the people, and there's an extent to which it doesn't. And I think as more and more, justices get, I mean, really it's one seat ultimately, right? It's not so much that she got this seat when she shouldn't have. It's that Kavanaugh, right, got the seat that, Merrick Garland probably should have gotten, or at least should have had, that should have happened. That's the way the process is laid out. And is it a great process? I don't think so. Not particularly. I think the U.S. Constitution was a great improvement overall on what there was before it. In the last 250 years, I think there should have been some larger advances. Now, obviously, there were huge changes, right? Yes. But even within those changes, like if we say, look at the 13th Amendment, the changes as they appear on the surface didn't always match the changes of like what actually happened. And, like having a carve out, for instance, of like, oh, well, if you're convicted of a crime, then, you could still be a slave. It's like,
right. Right. I mean, and to me, that wasn't, that was wholly intentional, but.
Oh, for sure. But, I guess I would say I would imagine so. Like, I haven't like done the research on the historical, like everything that actually went into that. But it seems likely, and if you have done the research, I will take you at your word on that.
Yeah, the new Jim Crow is must read. Yeah. I mean, and if not, the documentary, the movie they did on it, the 13th. Yeah, really, really great watch. And I mean, it's one of those things where it's like it couldn't have been an accident. You know what I mean? Just and right. It basically kept the continuity of slavery such that there was only a slender window through which black people could achieve any freedom before all the people who were slaves were just convicts. Or not all of them, but you know what I mean.
But
a tremendous number, like far too many, and for far too long, and that's how it remained and how it remains to this day. Now we have more black men under institutional control, whether it's in prison directly or parole, whatever, than there ever were at the height of chattel slavery, and it's worse now. And unfortunately, things like the '94 crime bill, et cetera, made the situation much worse. And so, really, I feel like all of this stuff, like, I agree so much that the government itself and the idea of government is something that should, I mean, okay, so just getting into the meaning of the word, right? There always will be some type of governance when you have people, right? Because like, and that's not to say a structured government with a constitution, but there has to be some way for humans, in order to get anything done, to be able to agree on and all agree to some sort of set of rules. And obviously that's a set of rules that everyone should buy into, et cetera, but it will function in some way as a government. It just will be a government that actually represents the people rather than being something that is imposed upon the people, right? So, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, a government of choice, basically.
Yes, exactly. And and also I feel like the conversation has to be had that like with the amount of people and the amount of working pieces, there needs to be something because we just can't at this point unless there is heavens forfend some sort of massive near human extinction event. And I don't
Right.
attempt this year to not to try and throw something like that at us. But there has to be something, right? And we can't go. It's kind of like I am an abolitionist. I am for the abolition of slavery because America is still a slave owning country, and like I wish more people would say it like that, right? The 13th Amendment did not illegalize slavery; it just changed the conditions of slavery. That's it, right? It didn't make it illegal. It just made it only legal if you were a prisoner. But then, whatever, you just have a police state, and then you're good to go, right? The fascist fuck shit is built into this country. This country is inherently fascist. And it's hard even to argue in good faith that it is not, right? It's just run by people who are either sort of rolling back gently some of the fascistic elements, I mean mostly domestically, because abroad those just keep expanding under whoever the fuck's in charge, right? Whoever's in charge, like maybe we're trying to treat people here a little bit better over time, but like we got 850 900 military bases at the fucking back door of every country on this planet. Like that is we are a police state on the world, like that, and so the fact that more Barack Obama was just so brilliant to let a black person be, or a biracial person be president, right? Because that really did it especially for, our generation, where it was like we grew up on, the Cosby Show and Different World and United Colors of Benetton, and, where it just seemed like racism was much less of a thing, right? But it not only was it not, but it was fucking getting worse, right? Because the best thing you could have done for it was make everything just have to go to dog whistles. And now I think, we're going to go back to SCOTUS in a second. But the biggest, I think the biggest characteristic of the right now is disingenuousness. Because they know they can't just say the thing, right? But so they have to just pretend that they mean something else or use other words and whatever. And it's like, we know what the fuck you mean, right? And we know that you can't just say it, right? But the fact that they've been able to go underground with it and make, the laws are technically race blind, but they're not race blind, right? And I mean, at least the people who are adjudicating them are not race blind. So for all intents and purposes, it ends up being, and speaking of laws, what do you think we should do in response to her now being on the Supreme Court and there being the 6-3 majority?
I mean, so in my view, it just like completely delegitimizes the Supreme Court. It's just like, the process of members being added or not being added was just completely manipulated in a total lack of good faith, right? Mm-hmm. Like basically saying, we don't care what the Constitution says, which is supposedly what gives legitimacy to the government, right? That's supposed to be the highest law in the land. So if you're going to say, this is a government, it can tell you what to do, blah, 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 then if you just completely undermine the highest court, you've, I think, successfully basically undermined the whole idea of the system being something that actually makes sense, or that this is a set of rules that we're actually playing by. Right. So I think that's very dangerous. And I think to some extent stupid and very short-sighted. like, I mean, what you were saying about how there was, like, I mean, I wanted to, throw in the quote, like, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's, I grew up with this idea, like, basically being taught by a bunch of people who I think were very overall, like, well-meaning, liberal, like, wanting there not to be racism and sexism and all these kinds of structural systemic injustices, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was taught basically that, like, oh yeah, we kind of dealt with that in the 60s and like the 70s and like
Yes.
we're good now.
Yes.
And I think they believed it. Like, I really do.
Mm-hmm.
I think other people maybe didn't believe it and were like, oh, they think that's going to work. Like, that's not going to work.
Right.
But there was definitely, I think, this feeling of like, that's how the world was. That's America's past. And like, we're good now. And like, because we got everything on the books and everything will just be fine. And then I was like, oh yeah, but there's still people who have prejudice and stuff. And like, I had family members, or like particularly one who was just like outright, like blatantly racist. But at the same time, in that way where it's like, it's like, oh, but like one of his best friends is black. It's like, how does that kind of,
yeah.
But it's just like, there's so many people like that who, they can make an exception for someone they know, but say they were on a jury, right? Like, yeah, he's like, oh yeah, my friend's my friend, but that person, I don't know that person.
Yes.
And I'm going to make whatever assumptions I am about them based on the tiny bit of information I have, which is like, their skin color, their gender, like, maybe their socioeconomic status. And so I think the fact that people can kind of make exceptions to their biases actually, in a way, makes those biases a little more dangerous, because it makes it so insidious, and it makes it's like,
right.
It gives all these kind of bad faith talking points against. It's like, oh, I mean, there's like people who still think these things aren't a big problem, right? Yeah. And obviously they are, but for a while, there was so much of a story, like pretending, kind of like not like lying about the past, it's so deliberately, but kind of trying to like set it off from the present in a way that is
right.
Very sometimes dishonest and sometimes misguided and ignorant. And I mean, that's how I saw the world for a long time. And like, then it's like, oh no, things are still really bad.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
really bad. I mean, like, I always thought things were bad, but like, not specifically.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I kind of like that what you were just talking about like, basically it's dangerous that people have those holes, because it does add a lot of like, the ability for bad faith, but also it makes it less logical. And the less logic there is to it, the more the harder it is to fight. Because, it's like, it's all these black Republicans, right? All these people who,
right. Yeah.
Like, and it's, when it comes down to it, it's just about money, right? And they're willing to overlook the racism that they know to be there, and they have definitely experienced at some point in their life, mostly for money.
No doubt.
Right? So,
right.
And the
for
other
like
thing,
financial comfort, basically.
For financial comfort, right. And I really feel like that's a conversation that needs to be had, like, when we're talking about that disingenuousness, is like, okay, at a certain point, it just has to be acknowledged. Like, if you're like a black conservative right now, you have just said, I don't care if there's racism and people think less of me because of my skin color, as long as I can get this money. And that's the choice you've made. It's clear. There's not really any other option to it. You can't honestly believe that it doesn't exist, because, I mean, it obviously does, right? There's story after story of conservatives being pulled over by cops. And there was a recent story, I can't remember exactly who it was, but somebody had just been talking up the Republican Party, and then they got pulled over and got their asses whooped by the cops. And of course, let's just let's just take it to its furthest end and talk about fucking Herman Cain. Okay, there's a through line from him being like, let's listen to Donald Trump. COVID is not a big thing. I'm going to this rally. I'm dead. And it's so, I mean, the crippling, cruel irony of him being like, you know, the black one to die first in a pandemic that is affecting black people much worse than it's affecting other demographics of people. And the fact that the other thing that's so weird about that is that Herman Cain's Twitter kept going. And I feel like it was sort of like a way for them to just sort of gloss over the fact that he had died. And it's weirdly effective because no one's really talking about that. Like, yeah,
it was not the story that I thought it would be.
Yeah. And it's so strange because, I mean, that's a huge story, right?
Yeah.
That's like, that should be, I mean, it should be something that, and it's something that, I mean, and it's one of the reasons that I believe more and more every day that the Democrats are their controlled opposition. I don't think that, and don't get me wrong, the younger ones, I think that they actually believe that they can do something within the Democratic Party, but the Democratic Party as an institution, right? I believe that it is intentionally controlled opposition because it's just not possible for them to be that bad at their jobs. It's just not fucking possible, right? Like Dianne Feinstein.
Yeah.
She is either criminally terrible or she's doing it on purpose. And I feel like, you know, her performance with Lindsey Graham recently, where she's hugging up on him, and she's like, "Oh, thank you so much for these these have been the best proceedings for the Supreme Court I've ever seen," and hugs and he's chock full of COVID. I mean, he is just sloughing off viral loads of COVID germs like all over her, and she's hugging up on him because they're fucking golf buddies. Their kids probably go to the same school, and does she actually want black people and gay people? And does she actually want? No, she is the classic Karen. You know, she is she wants all the same things that the white male power structure wants and sees herself as part of it. Right? She's chosen her strongman leader to stand behind. And the most effective thing they could have done is put her and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, all of those motherfuckers, all of them, they're in on it. I mean, and it's like, I feel like it beggars belief to say that they're not, right? It's like accidentally, the odds are that they would have gotten some of their choices right by now, but they intentionally or seemingly intentionally make the wrong choices every single time, right? I mean, Biden could have been leaning on the Herman Cain story. Why? Yeah. Why not? Why is he not doing that? Like, because there are some of the black vote is peeling off, and more of it is actually just that people are like, fuck both of these people. And honestly, I don't blame any black person for not voting for the top line because I get it. You know, I get it. I get it.
I mean, you look at the 1994 crime bill, right? And
exactly. I mean, I think Biden knows, Biden is, like, I think you said earlier, I think Biden believes that he's doing good things, but the problem is that he's an American. And if you're American that is, 70 some odd years old, the odds that you're not hella racist are just low. Because that's America. That's all the acculturation you got. That's all the movies you watched. That's everything that you got from, you grew up in segregation, so you didn't have that many early experiences except for maybe when he went to the pool and dealt with Corn Pop, who was a bad dude, besides those experiences where he was acting in a weird paternalistic fashion towards black people, even though he was interested in and curious about them, right? We have to understand that racism is not only very real, but way more insidious and way more endemic, it goes all the way to the left. It goes all, it's not like we're not, so many people fail implicit bias tests, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, but I will say one compassionate thing, which is that we also shouldn't really blame ourselves too much for the first thing that we think, because that's acculturation. It's what you
Right.
do and what you put out into the world that actually matters. And I feel like it's even better. Like that's why, John Brown, that motherfucker is like, he is one of my favorite heroes of history because he grew up in slavery times and he was like, you know what? Fuck every ounce of this. Like, I'm going to go and help these people get some guns and get the fuck out of slavery because look, this is terrible. Like, can't you all see that this is terrible?
Team Cool, what up, cuz? Picking up the pieces left from all the old seasons, trying not to cut my fingers as I rearrange the sequence. Painting hella pictures and I barely use a easel, working way too hard to make this here look easy. So here we are in New York with my feet up, plotting a whole mission, breaking down hella reefer. A seeker of perfect wisdom and knowledge, and though I didn't finish college, I could make students of some of my teachers. Features of a young black god, holding strong black rod, shining bright like rye. Leeches wanna suck my light, but that ain't right. I gotta fight to keep these lames in place on the bleachers. They heat it, cause back when they could reach us, they never reached out, and now they claiming that they need us. Jesus, have mercy on them. I say a little prayers, I'm adjusting my breath.
Universal health care. Every other person in the world is looking at America like, what the fuck are you doing?
It's like the one issue that, to me, it's just madness. It's just the fact that we can't have that.
Yeah.
Because there are corporate interests, right? Basically, like, Obama ran on a platform of, I'm going to get more people health care, right? Because the healthcare system in this country is totally messed up, which, was totally true. And then that his solution to that was, let's dig deeper into this system. And I mean, I do think that, things are better with the Affordable Care Act than they were without it.
Sure.
If it had just stayed the way it was.
Right.
But it's another one of those things, though, that really kind of, it gave ground to people who think that there should be public health care, right? Or that to people who think everyone should have health care. It ceded ground in that direction.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it also kind of it entrenched, corporate healthcare, basically, which is another way that people are controlled as wage slaves, right?
Yes.
Like in this country, like if the number of people I know who I worked briefly in a poker room, for about a year and a half, and they have the best healthcare that basically you can possibly have. Where I went to the hospital 2 times, both ended up fine, and I had an appendectomy at one point, and they sent a bill for $10. Like there was no pay at point of service. There was no, and then basically, if you're an outpatient, you pay $10, and besides that, it's zero. Everything was zero. It's all $10 or zero for everything. And that experience, I found it very moving because it felt like I'm going to the hospital because I have a pain, and they're like, oh, it's this bad thing. We're gonna have you hospitalized for 2 days, pumped up with IV antibiotics, and that's scary.
Yeah.
That's some shit to deal with. Many people have much scarier things to deal with, much worse, much more challenging, life-threatening health situations, more painful. And when you have something like that going on, if you don't have to worry about the money out of it, aside from maybe I have to call out of work, which also we could talk about that, but then you just have to worry about what is wrong, what, the health situation you have to deal with right there.
Right.
That's enough for anyone to deal with, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that people have to be like, I don't know if I should go in, I don't have the money or whatever. And then, first of all, some of those people choose to go in and then they go bankrupt. Yep. Or, they're more broke than they were before. And some of them don't go in and they stay sick and they get worse. And some of them die. Tens of thousands of people, right, every year die in the United States from lack of healthcare. It's like more people than died in Vietnam, I think, or more Americans than died in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Like, how is this still a thing? And it's because because we have this ridiculous like system. It's not even really a system, right? It's like a ecosystem. It's almost like a lack of a system. It's just the way things function. But just that feeling that I had was like, everybody should have this.
Yeah.
Everybody who has to go to the doctor, has to go to the hospital, should have this without having to feel like, oh, but if I quit my job, then if I have anything go wrong with me, I'm going to be fucked.
Yep.
You know, and the number of people I know who still work there right now in a casino during a pandemic.
Yep.
Because otherwise they wouldn't have health care. They'd lose their health care during a pandemic. Like, it's ridiculous. It's basically all of them at this point, you know, and it's disgusting. It's
absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And to take it further, like, you know, I believe that not just the people who are in prison are slaves, but I do believe that, you know, the way that America is set up makes us essentially all enslaved, because if you don't have
to different degrees, right? I mean,
absolutely.
It's like
absolutely.
It's like we always want to acknowledge, look, it's not the same thing.
Right,
but it's still fucking disgusting.
Right. I mean, like, it's kind of like, you know, when people say the Democrats and the Republicans are the same, that's not true. They're not the same, but they're way too fucking similar.
Exactly.
It's not that they're exactly the same, but like there should be some daylight, and for you know, to say it is not terribly hyperbolic to say that someone, and I mean, and this is like, some people think this is a controversial thing to say, but I'm like, look, if you make $200,000 a year, right, from a job,
right,
you are enslaved to that job to a point, maybe even more thoroughly than somebody who makes less, because if you lose that, you lose a whole bunch more stuff, right? Because like, and
it's going to be harder to replace,
and
too,
it's going to be harder to replace, exactly.
Awesome.
And like, I feel like one of the things that we need people to understand is that you're either a worker or you're a ruler. And that's one of the reasons that more celebrities, like, people talk shit on celebrities, and I think one of the reasons that people want celebrities to stay out of political conversations is, I mean, because some of them have terrible ideas and terrible takes and they're not that bright, whatever. But it's because, like, they're workers, right? Until they get to the point where they become rulers, they're workers. They're still workers. And also, they are not yet, you know, like Cardi B. Like, Cardi B is like 4 or 5 years removed from being like, you know, any one of us. And so she has, no matter how giant her house and how much money she's making now, like, it's not like she was born with it, or, right? And so, you know, who knows what's going to happen to her kid, right? Having grown up with that, and like, maybe that'll be a different thing. But like performers and artists, like, they're workers, and people who are, you know, workers need to actually unite against the system, because the system is intended to. It's not like, you know, it's not a bug. It's a feature. The workers belong to the state, and if you go too far afield, they'll get you. They'll get you one way or the other, whether it's through healthcare, whether it's through the cops, and sometimes, look, and if it gets to it, you know, it always escalates, right? If they have to actually send someone to. I want to briefly talk about what I think is the most fucked up and frightening thing about Trump, and why I feel like he should be voted against if you live in a swing state. And it's the Michael Reinl thing. Michael Reinl was the guy who he was at a protest and he shot a right-wing counter-protester who was threatening the lives of some left-wing protesters at a Black Lives Matter march. And he shot and killed the right-wing protester, then went home and was apprehended. Well, apprehended is too strong a word. They didn't apprehend him. U.S. Marshals showed up and they fucking shot him. They shot him while he was eating a gummy worm when they shot him. Okay, so it's not like he was like strapped to the gills or he was making bombs. No, he was just trying to go back to his house, eating a gummy worm, and the U.S. Marshals came and killed him. And that was directly on the order of Trump. And then Trump has been bragging about it ever since. And he says things like, "Oh, we told him to, we were like, when are you going to go get this guy? He's a bad guy. When are you going to go get him? And you know what? We sent the U.S. Marshals and it was over in 15 minutes. We took care of it. And there's no problem anymore. There's no problem." And that's like, that story needs to get more light because that's old school fascist shit. That's like political enemy. Doesn't matter that everything that he did was legal. It was, and he actually was heroic in what he did, but they went and they killed him. There, no trial, no apprehending him. They went and they killed him, and then they bragged about it. And if that doesn't tell you what's going to happen in a second term, like that shit is terrifying, right? That's not regular. And some leftists even have countered with, well, Barack Obama did that. He sent a drone in to bomb that guy they couldn't get, like on American soil. Not like a flying drone, but like a robot. It was like a robot carrying a bomb.
In Texas, right? Was
that
Houston or Dallas?
Yeah. I'm not sure. I think it was Dallas, but anyway, yes.
Yeah, robots with bombs. That's a good idea.
Right, exactly. And it's like but then again, that of course gets back to like, there is too much similarity, right?
Right.
Because those two things, they're not at all the same, but they're too fucking similar. It's too similar. And now people can't tell the difference when you actually, and one of my, not my last, but the episode before last, it was called A Wolf at the Door. And it was talking about the little boy who cried wolf because, the main moral of that story is that you shouldn't tell lies. But to me, another moral of that story is that, like, sometimes the person who lies to all the time is going to be telling the truth.
Right.
And so, like, it's like more about, you have to be discerning, and you also have to just, you got to just look at the situation, each situation as it is. Because, you know what? As many times as they've said, well, you got to vote for this person or it's the end of America or whatever. Like, this time it's actually, it's obviously and apparently true, right? And whether or not you believe it's good that it's the end of America, right. Look, there are some ways that I'm like, yes, that's good, but not this way, not like this, right? Not turning over the keys to like the world's greatest like purveyor of death to somebody who wants to and knows how to use it well and who is backed by. How do people forget about Steve Miller and Steve Bannon?
Right.
Like Steve Miller has we're talking about Olympic level racism coming off of Stephen Miller. Like it's amazing that, and he manages to fly under radar, which is unbelievable to me. Right. But he's the architect of all the super racist shit because, one good thing about Trump is that he's not an ideologue. He doesn't care, but he's he
doesn't care about anything.
And exactly. Yeah. He's empty and broken like all true narcissist megalomaniacs are, right? There's no amount of adulation that will ever make him feel better about himself, and that is, you might feel bad for him if he weren't so terrifying because of that.
Yeah, like he's the character who, like, at the end when they're broken and have nothing, you can look at like a pitiful creature, and like if they're never going to have any kind of power again, like, you can look at them with some level of mercy or whatever. But when it comes to someone with that much power, it's just there's no room for that. There's no room to really see the human. It's like, yeah, you can see the human, but it's like, who cares if they're doing that much damage?
It's true. At a certain point, yes, I think we went a little bit too far down the path of like, well, everyone's got a little good to them, so let's like start. It's like, no, okay, everything's on a continuum, right? And at a certain point,
Yeah.
the amount of bad you've done outweighs any good you've done. It just doesn't matter. Like, you do have to take kind of an absolutist stance, an absolutist stance on certain people and how and what they should be allowed to do, right? And I say that even as like a prison abolitionist. Like, don't get me wrong. I think the number of people who would be in prisons would number in like maybe the thousands globally, right? Because there are not that many people that if you gave them enough food and mental health care and, you know, a place to live and conditions that would foster them and allow them to be the person they were supposed to be, you would not get as many people who committed crimes. And also, if you changed what crime meant, whatever. There's a lot of things that would reduce the number of people who would be criminalized, right? But it's also naive to suggest that there aren't some people that just for whatever reason, they just want to do fucked up stuff. And so that there always will have to be some way to deal with that. But I think, you know, since we live on a fucking the Death Star, or like a giant prison barge with an American flag flying from it. And so we consider everything a problem to be handled criminally, and it's kind of seeped into our entire culture. Let's wrap up because we have gone on much further than we intended to for a test run. But I will say that in response to SCOTUS, the most important thing that we should do is November 4th, after we can get all these like brunch libs to stop scream shouting about voting, is we keep the same level of energy and we keep the same amount of involvement in politics, and we keep all the energy that we're putting into the discussion about Biden versus Trump into politics forever. Maybe it sucks, maybe it's annoying that we are born at a time where we have to like hardcore fix a bunch of shit, but that's where the fuck we are, right? And I mean, yes, we should pack the courts as a preliminary measure just to like stanch the bleeding. But I think you hit the nail on the head earlier when you were like, the whole fucking thing it's illegitimate. And beyond that, actually, not only is it illegitimate, but Tom Hartman, Professor Tom, I refer to him as, was talking about how the Supreme Court isn't supposed to even be giving us information.
Unfortunately, I can't hear anything you're saying because
something's happened. Okay. Well, I can still hear you. You know, I'll tell you what. I'm just going to wrap this up. We're having some technical difficulties, but I'll wrap this up by saying the Supreme Court should not have as much power as it does, and it came mostly because of a note added in the header of a decision, not even the actual decision or anything like that. I will get more information on that and I will give it to you. But we cannot afford, ever, at any point moving forward, to forsake politics. Politics is our life now, all of us. And that means starting at the lowest levels in your individual life to the highest levels, we need to be involved. Like I said earlier, Bolivia didn't win at the polls because they won just by voting. They got in there and they had a general strike. They did everything that was necessary to take control of their own governance back into their own hands before it got to the point of voting. And voting was just the icing on the cake, right? So we need to start building that layer cake of workers' power, of people's power, of intersectional people's power at every level. And then we can discuss and decide on and change things like our Constitution and who is governing us and all the things and the Supreme Court and things of that nature, right? We have work to do for the rest of our lives. So let's start doing it. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. This has been the Focused on Infinity podcast. You can find me on Twitter at WatcherInfinite and on Instagram at Focused on Infinity, and also on twitch.tv/Focused on Infinity. I'll be doing some live streams and some other things there as well. And please do support my Patreon so I can continue doing this sort of thing and do it bigger and better. Much love to everyone. Please stay safe and keep wearing your mask. Be prepared for the days ahead because things are going to get only more dramatic before they get any better. Grendel out.
I'm going to record my final thoughts, which you can cut in anywhere if you want or not. Basically, you were saying a bunch of stuff that I imagine I would strongly agree with if I heard all of it. I'll take that I mean, that just tends to be how we think, I think. I think that some ways to sort of deal with the current situation, like say after November 4th, I mean, but even before then, is try and, get local governments and state governments to be more in line with what we want them to be doing. So the lower courts will be making certain rulings that maybe aren't going to be things that go up to the Supreme Court, or maybe that they, do things a little differently, right? I do think stacking the court is like maybe packing the court, like just, it's like, okay, well, if you're going to play dirty, we're going to play dirty, even though that's not necessarily the we that I would include myself in. And then also just when things are completely unacceptable, I really think like a general strike is... like, what are you going to do? I mean, the economy right now has been very hard hit by things shutting down, by people not being able to go to work because of, coronavirus, obviously. But you could have as large or larger impacts by people just being like, no, we're not going to work because this is unacceptable. And, at some point, it's like, you just can't keep playing along. That's how I see it. And you just have to be like, no, we're going to do something different. Yeah. And then I also want to mention that John Brown was like my great uncle. And I thoroughly support the idea of if you're going to keep people in completely unacceptable conditions and, say that you think it's okay to own people and tell them what they can and cannot do, then yeah, if someone else wants to get them a bunch of guns and overthrow those people who are just completely violating the just most basic human rights, then I think that's, an okay thing to do. Anyway, yeah, you probably... I'm going to just stop talking, because, yeah, okay. But this has been fun, aside from the technical difficulties and the world being on fire and all that.